Good morning, everyone. Thank you all so much for being here. Thanks for the response. We're going to try it again. Good morning, everyone. Okay. Thank you all so much for being here today. I am Lauren Green Hall. I am the Associate Director at Fair Housing Contact Service, and I am the moderator for our panel here today. If you were in a previous panel and they stood at the podium, you will have to forgive me for sitting down, but I have a broken leg, so I'm going to sit for a couple of minutes here while we're chatting this morning. Just the same as the other panels earlier, we're going to have some conversation up here. I've got some questions for our panelists, and then we're going to open it up to the audience for y'all to ask questions. I would request that you keep your question to just like a minute or two, and that we not have any personal issues brought up during your questions. We really can't address those here at this time. We're really talking in a more general way about how we can coexist. As residents in our community and as housing providers in our community, we want to talk about what we need to do to coexist in more effective ways. So as we get started here today, thank you so much for being here. Definitely jot your questions down on your notes pages as we're going along. And I'm going to do a quick introduction of our panelists, and then we're going to start with some questions. So today we have Mr. Courtney Cooper. He is a resident here in Akron. We have Mr. Euphrancia Lash, who is with the City of Akron and chairs our landlord tenant council for the city. And you'll forgive me, Euphrancia, because I don't know your exact title. What is your exact title, Euphrancia?
Deputy Public Service Director and of Neighborhood Assistance.
There we go. I can't keep track of all the titles. And we have Mr. Gary Wyatt, who is a private landlord here in the Akron area. And then we have Miss Debbie Berry, who is the interim executive director at Akron Metropolitan Housing Authority. So we have some great questions for them today, and hopefully you all will as well. So I'm going to start out. We just kind of want to start our conversation here today to make sure everybody's on the same page and understands that our community has many different types of housing. Sometimes those types of housing are governed by various types of rules and regulations. Sometimes they're just private housing that's governed by Ohio tenant landlord law. Really always just depends. So I'm going to ask Debbie if you can kind of explain to us the different types of housing that AMHA provides so we can kind of have that understanding of those types of housing in our community.
Thanks, Lauren. Akron has several different types of housing. First, we have our low-income public housing, which is our brick and mortar buildings that are subsidized. The rents there are 30% of the income. And then we have our mixed finance tax credit properties, and those rents are affordable based on the tax credit income limits, and then they're also market rate properties. We also have our housing choice voucher program, which we have about 5,400 vouchers in the community. And we have various types of vouchers too. We have our regular housing choice vouchers, and then we have specialized vouchers, emergency housing vouchers, FUP vouchers, which are family reunification vouchers, vouchers for our veterans, VASH vouchers, those come with supportive housing. We have mainstream vouchers. Those are vouchers for the non-elderly disabled populations. And then we have project-based vouchers too. We have a couple of permanent supportive housing projects, and those are specialized vouchers for those populations. We also get a lot of phone calls, field a lot of phone calls for properties that are not ours. I think anybody who thinks something is affordable calls AMHA, but there's a lot of private landlords who also do affordable housing in Summit County as well.
Thank you, Debbie. That is helpful. So we all understand that these different types of housing really are handled in different ways. And we can't speak to every single one of them today, but we just want to make sure everybody understands that as we're going forward. Mr. Cooper, I know we've talked before about the type of housing that you live in. So can you share with our audience the type of housing that you live in and a little bit about what your experience has been?
The type of housing that I live in, ma'am, I am a disabled veteran, and I love this country very much. I'm very fortunate that President Obama allowed me to get housing. I was homeless, and President Obama said he didn't want no veterans being homeless. So that opened up and changed my world. I'm just so grateful. The type of housing I live in, the government went in with CSS, which is a nonprofit organization for people with mental disabilities and homelessness. And so we all fit into this criteria. We are all high risk of being homeless again. And so that's the type of building that I live in now. And I am the president of the resident council, and I'm trying to unite people, and it keeps me busy, but I enjoy it. I really do.
Good. All right. So now that we all kind of have that understanding of various types of housing, landlord-tenant relationships can be challenging. They can sometimes even be adversarial. And we wanted to have this panel today to really talk about what are some of the things that can improve those relationships to not make it adversarial. Oftentimes when folks get to court, that's the end of the line. Those conversations haven't happened yet, or those conversations have really broken down. And so really talking about what are the factors that create and foster positive relationships. So Gary, tell us what has worked with your tenants as a private landlord. What has worked to foster those healthy relationships with your tenants?
Well, basically one of the things, most of my properties is Section 8, so it's several mediators between that. Section 8 do a super good job at mediating what they tenants should be doing. And so by the time it get to me, I already know the expectations, and the tenant knows the expectations or what it means to rent and be in agreement. But if you have a disagreement, like an example, maybe a water bill, there's so much that Section 8 allots for a water bill, and if a tenant just, you go over there one day and they running a swimming pool and got the neighborhood washing their cars, you got to address that. And so I had just a quick story. A lady was saying, well, I can run as much water as I want. Yeah, Section 8 is paying my rent. But come to find out, when I addressed it, you got so many cubics, a family of 4 is usually between 4 and 6 or 7 cubics with the water company. Well, they was at 14. So I'm looking at this water bill, I'm like, hold up, y'all, what y'all washing over here? Y'all got a car wash going on, running the swimming pool? I know it's 85, but we gotta work this out. So they took me to Section 8. Section 8 says, you allotted $175 as a utility supplement. So when I explained to the lady, I said, ma'am, listen, you got an extra $175. That's so in your water bill, it was $350. I said, so technically you should stay under that. And here's what I'm gonna do to help you out. So after we was able to educate and work together, she actually got that water bill down. And that was just one situation where we worked together, because I already knew what they was doing. So I didn't want to go in and just, just put it to her, and then we got to fall out. Because you know what, as a landlord, you really don't want them tenants to move out. I've been a good landlord. I'm a different landlord. I'm in the business for a different reason. So I'm in it to help people, not to make money. Yeah, we all want to make money, but I'm really in it to help people. And so I'm very gracious to have Section 8 on the majority. At least 3 of my houses are Section 8 because of the rules. And so we usually sit down and work it out. And if that's an issue, then Section 8 handles it. So I'm very gracious and compassionate, because everybody don't have the patience, everybody don't have the income, everybody don't have the know-how to come up with a solution. And that's what I'm here for, to come up with a solution.
So Gary, it sounds to me that open communication has been really important for your business model as a landlord. So Mr. Lash, can you tell us some of the things that has been happening at the city with the Landlord-Tenant Council, and how the city is working on developing those communication routes for landlords and tenants?
Sure. And first of all, I want to thank Community Legal Aid and those who have taken the time to convene this symposium. One of the things that the mayor tasked me with was, and I see some partners here in the audience, was bringing together a group of tenants and a group of landlords to come together to formulate the Landlord-Tenant Advisory Council. And what we do is we convene on a monthly basis, and we have a meeting to talk about strategies, realistic strategies, to work towards better communication, better policies, and solution-based goals here in the city of Akron that will help us reduce the eviction rate, reduce a lot of these issues that we have between landlords and tenants, and that's what we are working towards. We're not totally there yet. We're continuing to meet, and we plan to produce a report probably within the next few months. But that is what we're tasked to do. We have a group of tenants from all over, different economic throughout the spectrum. So low income all the way to high income. We have landlords who oversee subsidized housing all the way to market rate. So we have a wide spectrum. So we wanted to get people who are across the board that could come together, communicate, put solutions on the table to propose to the mayor and to city council as to how we can better this situation in the city of Akron.
Has there been good communication amongst those members in how they're interacting and developing some of those hopefully new strategies?
Absolutely. I mean, you have, I'm sure some of you have seen in the news lately some of the issues that we've been experiencing. We've had some of those tenants that have come to the table and shared some of those real stories. And some of them have been horrific. I mean, you have, rodent infestations, you have mold issues, you have young children in those conditions. But you also have compassionate landlords as well. Yeah. So we've had the spectrum of individuals who have shared those issues, and we're continually discussing these issues as to how we can find reasonable solutions to overcome.
Good. It's good to hear that level of communication has begun in our community. As we said this morning, I think the pandemic has really brought eviction to light, and I'm glad to hear that some of those conversations are really happening and stuff.
Absolutely.
So, Debbie, tell us a little bit about how AMHA is able to foster healthy relationships with their residents and even with private landlords for your voucher programs. You guys span the spectrum as a landlord and kind of as a in-between, as Mr. Wyatt described. How have you guys really fostered that good communication?
Just being open and honest in the communication, being respectful, being a better listener. People want to be heard. I'm not talking over people. It's definitely one of them. Yeah, MHA is a tricky position because not only are we a landlord, but with our voucher program, we're in a partnership with the resident, and then we're in a partnership with the landlord, and then the landlord and the resident are also in a partnership. So we try to keep all three of those lines of communication open, obviously working on the solution.
Good. Thank you. And Cooper, what have some of the things that you've done at your own property where you live to foster good communication? As the leader of the tenant council, have you been able to work with other tenants to discuss how to communicate with your housing provider?
Well, I'm at the point where I am organizing now, and it is a continuous effort upon myself. As it was stated before, the elderly people, there is so much disinformation and so much misinformation. And, I'm under new management. My previous management, it just wasn't up to par. And so that left me in a state of anger, disappointment, anxiety, depths of depression. There was a bed bug issue at our place, and I thought it would never be remedied. The lady over there who said she had infestation, there is a great company out there. They got rid of it in less than 30 days. I am just amazed. So there's ups and downs, but you keep moving and you just be hopeful. There's hope.
So to speak to that issue of an infestation and it being addressed, that point in time when it was rectified, had management the new management that came in stepped up to really address the issue, is what I'm hearing from you?
No, it took me making a phone call to the health department.
Okay.
I had to take it upon myself to create a ruckus.
Okay.
And I did. There's so many agencies when you use your telephone, people. I called Housing Authority, AMHA. I called I called Civil Rights Division. They got behind me and supported me. But the man from the health department came out, walked around my place for 2 minutes and wrote them up. I mean, there are some good people. There's some good agencies, so many supportive agencies. Please talk to them calmly, peacefully. They listen. They had, the health department has some good answers for me as far as watching people trading furniture. You know, the health department said all of y'all should be locked down, but management wanted to curtail certain people but allow other people to go about their business. So why should I be restricted to my apartment? It's not solving the problem, because there's people who should be on there who are freely walking around. And so that's where I am. I'm just satisfied, you know. Life is a struggle. Hey, you don't give up. You make like a willow and you bend. So
it sounds like one of the things that is impactful for you is that management is effectively communicating what is supposed to happen, and that that applies to everyone, and not kind of these rules apply to this person and those rules apply to that person, but that kind of is that
no,
sound like
not
what was happening? I guess what I was hearing, I'm sorry. What I was hearing from you is that
yes, ma'am.
some people were allowed to do certain things and other people weren't. And so that
right.
inequity of the rules and how that's applying was a challenge.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
But also, I'm in a facility that houses CSS people, but I'm a veteran. Now, they have to be more monitored than me, whereas I am a independent person. So I don't want a landlord walking into my apartment unannounced, whereas CSS, it is practically normal for them to walk in unannounced, but I have to have boundaries.
So I think that speaks to the different rules and regulations that may apply depending on the type of housing someone's living in.
Yes.
And understanding that can sometimes be a challenge, I think.
Yes,
so,
ma'am.
yeah. So let's talk about who's responsible for what. When we talk about landlord-tenant relationships, traditionally there's a contract that goes along with that, a lease agreement, and that's a legally binding contract when utilized properly. And both parties have those responsibilities, but sometimes one of those parties isn't living up to those responsibilities. So let's talk about that, what those challenges are when responsibilities of each party may not be met, and maybe folks don't know what those responsibilities are. So Gary, can you talk a little bit about within your role as a landlord, what you believe your responsibilities are and what the responsibilities of your tenants are?
Yeah. Normally, when I deal with the tenant, we'll sit down, me and my wife, we'll interview them and kind of get a feel, ask questions that normally wouldn't be on the application. You just have a general conversation, because as you talk to somebody, you begin to see their heart, begin to feel them and see what they made of, because you just listen and then they'll just tell you what's really on their mind. So one of the things I always share, if we give you this house or allow you to lease this house, you treat it as though it's your own house. The goal is to see you move out of here, get your own house, as basically do unto others as you would have others do unto you. So basically, this your house. And if like when I'm over there cutting the grass for whatever reason, I cut those lawns because I actually be trying to show the kids, if there's kids involved, I get them, help them out, give them a few dollars, help them do the lawn. I'll show them certain things in the house, like the teenage daughter, ma'am, you don't pour the chicken grease down the sink. I explain that in a nice way, to the point where the parent is not real upset when the landlord come over, because first of all, listen, this your house, you're gonna have your own house one day, and my job is really to kind of show them on the down low in a nice way on how to, treat the property. I mean, I had one girl been in 3 of my Section 8 houses. She went from the north side to the south side to the east side. She's such a good tenant, 7 years. I don't want to let her go. So every time she wanted to move, I just moved her to another house because she was a good tenant, And sometimes you have to be an example. So as my own life, my mom rented all her life, and I used to hate when that man came from Cuyahoga Falls and Mr. Landlord. I told him my tenants kids, don't call me landlord, just call me Mr. Geary, because I used to hate that. So I try to treat them like as though they my children, or I try to show them in a way to help them better. So when they get their own house, they ain't got to be surprised or cussed out, So that's how I kind of, like I said, I'm a different landlord. Everybody can't touch their landlord. You got landlords who got hundreds of properties and you never see them type. Well, I'm in person, so I like to see what's going on with my properties because I'm local. I don't have properties in California. They're all local. So that's how I try to treat others as I would have others do unto me.
But it sounds like one of the things that's been effective for you is really building a positive relationship with your tenant. And that's allowed for open forms of communication, it sounds like to me.
Yes.
Would you agree?
Yes.
Great, good. So that seems to be a key point there. So, Debbie, what are some of the common misconceptions that you see among tenants in regards to their responsibilities as a tenant, but also their expectations of what the landlord's responsible for?
Going off of what Gary just said is if they do call in a work order, if for some reason it's not fixed properly, call in another work order or let the manager know. Unfortunately, we don't always know if it wasn't fixed properly, so keeping that, again, good communication, letting us know there's still an issue. Also, if there's crime at a property, calling the police first and foremost. A lot of times the residents want to start with the management company and it's after the fact, so calling the police first. And then with calling the police is once we know that there's something criminal happening, we normally open up our own investigation. And sometimes the misconception is we're not doing anything, but investigation and gathering the information does take a lot of time.
Yes.
And we do have to keep that information confidential until it comes to a solution. So just, again, communicating, but knowing that someone's situation might not be as black and white as you see it. There's also reasonable accommodations. Again, we have to keep things confidential. So someone's story, even though you think it's the same as your story, it might not always be the case. Neighbor relations would be probably another thing. Work towards having a good relationship with your neighbor on your own and seeing if you can work that out prior to coming to the management too, because with the neighbors you have to have that good open communication as well.
Okay. Cooper, what are your expectations of your housing provider, and what do you think are your responsibilities as a tenant when you're present in your unit?
My first is to pay my rent.
Good.
I am in permanent supportive housing. They created that permanent for a reason. Once upon a time, we had to go to treatment or go to some type of class or education to qualify for housing. President Obama said, no, let's give them housing first. And then that can build someone's self-esteem, and they can manage their own addiction or whatever they may be going through. To me, it works. It makes sense. It's, I enjoy the program and all of the supportive services that are out there. Thank you, people, if any of you are here, because this is where I try to empower the people within our residence. Knowledge is empowering. So, I just think of the elderly, though. They just take so preyed upon, and they're just not tuned into what's going on. But just each one teach one.
Okay, good. So we know that landlord-tenant relationships are governed by laws and policies, as I've said before, and sometimes those are different depending on the type of housing. And we acknowledge that there's a power dynamic there. The way that Ohio laws are currently set up, they are more favorable to the landlord. And we have to understand that that power dynamic can really impact the relationships and the communication style when problems arise. sometimes folks don't know who's even involved or who to call. Sometimes they don't know who their landlord is, or maybe their landlord has changed, property's been sold or something of that sort, or they're calling AMHA when they really need to call, and they have a voucher, but they really need to call their landlord. So understanding those relationships and those policies. Can we talk for a minute about what some of the key forms of misinformation or disinformation is that's out there? So I'm going to take a liberty as the moderator and say my favorite one, to go off of what Mr. Cooper said, is that I don't have to pay my rent if the landlord's not making repairs. If I can say anything, don't ever stop paying your rent. There are ways to deal with that. There's rules and policies that govern that to deal with that. So what are some of those key things, Mr. Lash, for you specifically, that you're seeing that the city is handling and dealing with some of those policies, and what role can the city really play in some of that?
Well, we really don't get into those issues between landlords and tenants, but one of the things that I always emphasize when I do talk to tenants is tenant education. It's critically important. You need to be totally educated as far as your lease. You need to know exactly what your tenant responsibilities are. So that's been one of the things that we've emphasized. And if there are services that we can, or partners in the community that we can refer them to, we do that readily so that they can actually be in the best position to deal with their landlord. When it comes to landlords, we don't necessarily involve ourselves with those, but again, if we can connect them to a service and try to work with them and advise them through those situations, we try to redirect them unofficially, of course, because we can't get involved. But definitely on the tenant side, tenant education is crucial, because you need to know, a tenant needs to know their rights, but landlords have their rights as well. So it's very important. And we have, from my position, we have to be impartial. So I don't take a side. I just, I advise when I can, and try to assist.
With the tenant education that you guys have promoted from the city, what about landlord education? What have you done on that side to educate landlords about what their rights and responsibilities are?
Well, that's something, you have a plethora of different types of landlords, So you have some that manage 3 properties. You have them all up to managing thousands of properties. So, landlords are governed by the law, just like tenants are. And like I tell people and share with people all the time, you have good landlords, you have bad landlords. Just like you have, good tenants, bad tenants. They're people too. So we try to advise them as best we can. And to speaking towards the Landlord Tenant Advisory Council, that's what we're discussing. That's what we're trying to discuss, some real solutions to share with the community, as to how we can better communicate, better get along, landlord-tenant relations. So we're working through that with the help of our various partners through the community. And I see some individuals from the courts. One of my key component and Judge Cable over here, and I see Montrell in the back as well. We've been talking about some of these issues, how we can better this issue in the city of Akron, how we can bring real solutions to the table to help the city of Akron better landlord-tenant relations.
Yeah. If folks were in the panel in this room previously, you may have heard Magistrate Hardaway talk about the court's mediation program. I think that's one way that communication is trying to be opened up in our community between landlords and tenants. But when it gets to an eviction court, at that point, we're already a little late for that communication. So we really want to try and see if we can open those lines of communication earlier. And maybe some of the education would be a good point in that to do. So Debbie, what are some of the things that you're hearing from your tenants? I mean, AMHA has the largest stock of housing in our community, has the largest number of tenants in our community of any housing provider. So what are some of the misinformation and disinformation that you hear from tenants, but also maybe even from your landlords that you work with?
Probably from our tenants. A lot of times we'll get that the property manager was out to get them, and I guess we do not send out a 30-day notice without sending a referral over to our resident services department. We have a very robust resident services department, and whenever we're sending out a 30-day notice, we're also doing a referral to them to get them involved, a third party, someone else for them to communicate with, if the relationship is torn, to hopefully bring the relationship back together. AMHA's goal is not to do evictions. We're one of the last places for people to go to, so we do not want to do an eviction, so we always want like that last chance to see what we can do to correct it. Probably another thing with the 30-day notice to terminate is that is definitely not the end-all be-all. That is letting the resident know that there's something here, that you're violating the lease, and we need it corrected. So you don't, when you get that notice, you don't have to up and move. Let's see if it's something that we can curable. And what we do tell our managers too is, maybe add a Post-it note to it. Hey, call me, this is curable. So again, we keep those lines of communication open. The other thing is unless there's a crime of violence or a drug thing, there's a whole grievance process you can go through. There's the informal grievance process, the formal grievance process, and then it would go to court. So even if you're getting the 3-day notice, that is not a 3-day notice to move. That's a 3-day notice letting you know that you're going to go to court. So just explaining the whole eviction grievance policy, I think, would be important. And then also we are lucky with a robust resident services program. We also have a robust police force and our investigations team too. So again, having those conversations and bringing those people in as needed.
Good. Gary, I know I love hearing your stories. So from your tenants, what have you heard before that is misinformation or disinformation from them?
Like one time, a misinformation. I had a tenant that got some mice in the house, and so she called herself calling Section 8, talking about, well, we got these mice in the house, and first of all, when they moved in there, the house, we inspect the house. I keep my house just like I would move in them or have to move back in them, or one of my kids got to move back in one of them, so I keep them up. And so she didn't know that I found out that her brother was living in the basement and had food in the basement and a refrigerator down there. And so, occasionally I go in and change the filters. And, and I just kind of look around to see how they maintain the house. So I said, well, ma'am, maybe if someone wasn't living in the basement with a Twinkie sitting on the cabinet over there, maybe the mice wouldn't be coming in, because we didn't have mice or roaches before you moved in here. And one thing about Section 8, they ain't playing with that. Like she talked about the 30 days. If they report something, whether it's true or not, you got to address it. And you got to address it within 30 days. So I already knew that when I called back down there for my final thing, I said, well, ma'am, what I didn't want to say is she had somebody living in the basement that had food down. Well, I ain't talking about telling Miss Debbie, but I didn't want to drop dime on the girl. But what I told her, I said, ma'am, you need to clean all this up. The refrigerator down there, it ain't working. You got food hanging out of it. That's why you got mice. She insisted on that Section 8 needed to address it. So what I did, since she didn't address her brother moving out of there, her lease came up just quietly. I ended her lease. I ain't had no more issues because it's a 1-year lease. So that's how I did to actually, because she insisted on coming out. I said, at the end of the day, I said, bye, Felicia, because that was her name. And it really was. I said, bye, Felicia, after the fact. And I said, I was the best landlord you ever had. But it was other alternatives. She had another idea about what she thought she was going to get over. So I'm just saying, there's a lot of personal stuff involved in that. So you got to be very careful, especially usually my wife handle a lot of that kind of stuff when it comes to slick women. But she's like, why you looking at me? No, I'm just saying, so them some of the things you got to be mindful, but it worked itself out.
But it sounds like you were able to identify ways to work with the tenant, and whether the tenant wanted to comply with what you were asking for is another story, but you attempted to, and you found ways to mitigate the situation at that point in time, that maybe didn't have to lead directly to eviction. Right. Obviously, that would have been your right to take that on if if you chose to, since they were not complying with the lease.
Right.
But you were able to find ways to mitigate the situation that worked effectively for both of you. So, Debbie, do you have something you want to add?
Hold up, just
Go
real
ahead.
quick,
Oh, yeah.
Lauren, I wanted to add, no landlord wants to go down and see Judge Cable down there, because by the time you get to him, that's $1,000 you done spent. So now you got to spend all this money to evict. I never had to evict nobody. I never evicted. Thank God they just left, and or I sent my crazy brother over there. No, I'm just playing. Yeah, sent one from the hood. No, I'm just playing. But I really said that. But no, I'm just saying nobody really, most landlords don't really want to evict people. They really don't, because it costs money to do that. Yeah. And so normally, like I said, I never evicted nobody in 16 years, so you try to work it out. So.
Yeah, no, I agree with Gary. We don't want to do evictions also. And that just reminded me, with the Housing Choice Voucher Program, some of our participants think if they don't get help with the landlord in getting their work fixed, that they're done. But they can always call AMHA and get a special inspection done.
Yeah.
We do our biannual inspections, but we can always come in and do a special inspection. And that special inspection can be for the landlord or for the resident, or if there's a neighbor that sees something fishy going on over there, anyone can call in for a special inspection and we'll follow up on it.
And Debbie, that was a special inspection. So when the guy came to the rental property, I showed him, I said, look at that refrigerator, look at that stuff in there. And so he, like the city, he non-biased, he didn't really get involved, but he took that note down. So that was addressed during y'all's investigation.
Thank you.
So I think you guys have made a good point. Those open lines of communication were able to work to address an issue, and it may not have been resolved to everybody's liking, but steps were taken, community resources were utilized to be able to ideally resolve the situation in the least harmful way at that point in time, is what I'm hearing from you guys. So, good. So, as we work to improve these relationships between landlords and tenants, what are some tips that y'all can name for us that you would suggest tenants or landlords utilize to maybe that are struggling with a situation or having a hard time communicating with each other? What are some tips that you would have? Cooper, you mentioned that you had some tenants organizing and some resources that you had referred folks to. What are some of those tips?
Well, one of them, I go to management or the landlord. In my case, I have a management. And I tell them, I want a win-win. It doesn't have to be someone loses. Let us both win. Be ready for compromise. I don't have to win. I just have to survive. So, and so I tell this to management, and boy, we get off to a good start. It really gets the energy pumping. They listen. They listen to me. But my goal is, I just want a voice at that table. Someone said it out there. I want a voice at that table because I live there. They work there. They go home at 4 or 5. I'm left there to hear the mice crawling through the ceilings and stuff. They don't see that part of it. So they don't, you have to connect with them. I have a way of connecting. But yeah, we get along great.
So starting with that form of compromise and focus of compromise has been a good thing that has worked for you.
Yes,
a good tip?
it has worked for me. And when I go to my support services, whoever it is, I try to get them on board too. Everything should flow like an orchestra. It should be a harmony. This service getting along with this service, and you let it flow. I don't believe in resistance. Life is not here to be bad to us.
Right.
Stop. Put the resistance down. I have to de-escalate so many residents and just saying, look, it's just saying comply. All you have to do is comply.
Yeah, right.
But I'm glad that I can have that open communication with them. And then I can go to management and I can vouch for that or stand up for that person. We need to help each other. We're all angels with one wing. We can only fly if we work together. You know, we have to join.
All right. Mr. Lash, what are some tips that you have?
Yeah, actually, when I get phone calls from residents in these situations, I always suggest, and one of the things we've been talking about with the Landlord Tenant Advisory Council is seeking resolution strategies. You know, one of the things that has been proposed, and I don't know exactly how we're going to carry this out, but seeking mediation in these situations. How can we bring the landlord and the tenant to the table to work through this issue before it escalates and it gets to the courts? You know, it doesn't necessarily need to get there, but what can we do prior to that to work out the situation? Because it is a real relationship. The landlord-tenant relationship is crucial. So how can what tools can we best utilize to get both the landlord and the tenant to a resolution? And it doesn't have to escalate to get to the courts. So those are some of the things that I actually suggest in my conversations.
Good. That's really helpful. Gary, what are some tips you have?
Some of the tips is like Director Lash said, just resources, letting them know about the resources. During COVID, one of the tenants had to pay additional $200 because their rent only covered such and such. And so she got like 3 months behind. And, you know, they was giving the COVID money from the Summit County, COVID, and I think the city was doing it too. So I said, well, maybe you ought to go down there and apply for it. She applied for it, got caught up on the rent, and everything worked out. So usually in those situations, it's even as a good landlord, you want to find out all the resources out there so it don't come to that point, because it's a lot of people that'll help you. I mean, I can just throw Catholic Charities out there. They pay utilities. So I'm always thinking of a way. If somebody come and say, well, I can't do this, I can't do that, well, call this place, call that place, call this place. So I'm already up on what they need to do just before they even answer, because it's usually most problems that a tenant and a landlord have is fixable.
Okay. Debbie, what are your tips?
I agree with Gary and Cooper. Keep those lines of communication open. I love the win-win situations too, Cooper. And the resources as well. Again, we're fortunate with the robust resident services program to be able to really get out there in the community and get on some of the other resources. I know we've been very fortunate with the CARES money, United Way. We've benefited and been able to refer a lot of our residents for that money. And just keeping those lines of communication open. If you can't get along with the property manager does have a supervisor. There are resident services people in the building. You gotta have that good communication and let them know what's going on.
Good. So we've had a great conversation up here, and we want to open it up to all of you that may have questions that you want to ask of our panelists. Again, I would ask that you keep your question to like 1 to 2 minutes max. We want to make sure that we can get to as many people as possible. And we do have someone that's going to walk around with a mic so that we can have you mic'd when you ask that question. So please wait until the mic gets to you. But if you have questions, let's talk about them. So when I see somebody raise their hand, I'm gonna call them out. So I have one back here, Linda, if you want to head that way, and then we'll keep going around the room from there.
My name is Lily Jackson. This question may be for the AMHA person. I'm a former tenant counsel for the Wilpeth Arlington complex when they first remodeled back in the 80s. AMHA, I blame you all for the blight of the rental problem on the east side. You stop embracing those tenants and those developments. Back then, the person was a social worker. They encouraged tenant counsel. They informed us on what was going. They encouraged voter registrations. We met at the unit under the Jackson and Leary administration. It was a lot more progressive. And then you became just the landlord and you collected the rent and you neglected the tenants, and this is what we have now.
So I guess I just want to make sure if there's a question there that you want to address, but what I'm hearing from you is that there's just some concerns that properties have not been maintained in our community.
I'd like to see AMHA go back and embrace their properties because we can thrive there. There was a lot going on. We were more progressive. Of course, you still had the problems with some tenants, but we were pro AMHA. Right now, it's not that way.
Good to understand. What other questions do folks have? Up here, Linda?
I'm sorry, where?
Sorry, right here.
Hi, my name is Ben Gifford. I'm with Akron DSA. I wanted to get back to mentioning something about tenants not acceptable to not pay rent, for example, keep paying your rent. As I understand it, a renter has a contract, so I think it's important for a landlord to also keep up that contract. So I guess what I'm getting at is it seems like there's an imbalance of power in the tenant and landlord relationship, and that the tenant faces eviction and possible homelessness if they break their end of the contract, and the consequences for the landlord do not seem as dire to me. So is there a role that you think city, county, et cetera, governments can play in easing that kind of imbalance if you see it as an imbalance?
Mr. Lash, I'll let you address that.
Thank you for the question. I actually don't want to delve into the legalities because I'm not an attorney and I'm not a judge. There are some in the audience, but you are right, and I do see the point. And those are some of the issues that we're discussing with the Landlord Tenant Advisory Council as to how we can kind of level the playing field, so to speak. I don't have the answer because I've never been to law school. There are some very capable people in the room, but I can assure you that those issues are being discussed because tenants have expressed that same sentiment as to how we can address that. And, that is something that's very, very serious and very close to the work that we're doing. So I appreciate the question. I just cannot answer it from my vantage point.
And I just want to add to that. That's the reason why we're having this symposium. The lady told the story about the unhumane, animals and all that in her apartment. And so I think this being one of the first of its kind in this area, that it's a possibility that we could become a role model for the whole country. Well, what did they do in Akron? You know what I mean? Just like we're a welcome city with the International Institute. Well, we could become a welcome city on how to find answers and solutions. And I think with us all in this room, there's some very smart people in here. And I think that what you're saying is that I think we'll be able to figure that out.
And if I could add, that's a very important question that you asked. And one of the things I would encourage you to do is to lobby your council, your council members, the mayor, your state legislative body, the governor, your congressman, because as was said in the session earlier, unless we actually engage ourselves in the process, things are not going to change. So it's crucially important that questions like you just asked are posed to the people that we have elected and that are in power, because that's the only way the changes are going to come. That's the only way it's going to happen is legislatively.
You have another question over here, Linda.
Hello, my name is John Goran. I'm a volunteer mediator for the ODR program for Akron Municipal Courts. The problem I see when we have issues and there are evictions and it's a very short time frame is the lack of communication. Mm-hmm. On this panel, we have people who are aware, who are communicating, but how do we reach all the landlords who aren't here? How do we reach the tenants? I heard about programs to help landlords make repairs. Is there a mechanism to make sure all landlords are aware of that funding if they need it? As well as CARES Act, and I heard Gary, you let your tenants know but not all landlords do. So how can we promote that communication before you get to the non-payment and controversy issue?
I think that's absolutely why we're here today, is to figure out how we can better communicate and provide that education. So can any of you speak to education opportunities for landlords and for tenants that exist in the community, maybe ones that you've participated in or that you know about?
Well, we do have the 211 number, United
Yes,
Way.
that's great.
That's probably one of the best as far as if they told they can call 211, because they pretty much can tell you anything, whether you need some food or whether you need rent paid. That's one I know of.
Just to add to that, I actually did attend the United Way luncheon yesterday, and there are a multitude of resources that they provide to tenants or residents who actually are renting, and they can be of great assistance in situations like that. Again, when it comes to the landlords, because you have, what I'm finding, you have a number of landlords who, especially since the pandemic, have come to the town and purchased properties, but they live in California, Texas, so they're not local and they could care less. So there's a number of issues that we need to actually deal with as a city to kind of curtail that. But those who are local, I mean, there are services that are available that residents need to reach out to and take advantage of.
Mr. Lash, am I correct in that even for the city's landlord rental registry that all landlords have to register their properties with, they have to identify a local person that will care for the property if they are not local. Am I correct on that?
That is correct.
Okay. So is the city able to utilize that rental registry in any way to share information at all, or has that been considered?
We have,
Okay.
but in many instances, that individual who is local does not have the decision-making authority to make decisions. So there are some issues that we need to overcome in that area, but you are correct.
Okay. All right. Just want to make sure I was thinking of that correctly there.
Yes.
So
And
so-
Lauren, AMHA has a landlord portal that we try to give our landlords all the information of. I know the CARES Act stuff was on our landlord portal. And then our Resident Services Department sends out monthly newsletters, keeping our residents informed. And then if anything comes out from United Way or the COC sooner, we will do, it's called a constant contact, where we're sending an email out letting all of our providers and residents and landlords know what's going on in the community also.
Great. I will add to your point there, so that Fair Housing Contact Service, and I'll give a small plug for my own agency, we provide education and information to all tenants and landlords. They just have to come to us is all. So we exist to do that as well. So I'm going to shift to the other side of the room. I see a question in the back there. Sorry, Linda.
I'm good.
We'll make Linda get her steps in today. Yeah. No, we'll want you to have the mic. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Deborah Holman. And first I want to say kudos to the landlords on the board, on the panel, for being good landlords. Not all are good or working with the residents. I think there needs to be something done on the local level, because I feel like there's a lot of politics going on, but when it comes to you living in unhumane situations, you don't want to wait a year or election to election time, which there is an election May 3rd. I hope everybody get out and vote in every election because they're all important. But as a tenant in the city of Akron, I just went through 2 years of HE double hockey stick. And when it comes to private landlords or private property, there needs to be, the key word is accountability. No matter where the landlord lives, the city of Akron needs to have something in place to make these people accountable, because to call these various agencies and to keep hearing, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, until you don't want to hear that phrase anymore, that's where I'm at. But it doesn't make them, even escrowing your rent doesn't make them do what's required. Because if the city of Akron is not holding these people accountable, they're going to keep doing, or should I say neglecting to do the things that's needed. And that's how I feel the sentiments of the lady over there with the Wilbur. The living conditions in these apartments that house senior, elderly, disabled people, it's ridiculous. Nobody should live like that. And the question people should ask is, would I want a family member? It doesn't have to be your parents. Would you want a family member living like some of us live in the city of Akron in these buildings? Whether it's AMHA or HUD or privately owned, accountability, everybody needs to be accountable. And I think one way of making that happen is people coming together, networking, the various agencies, so that when a person makes a phone call, they don't have to make 50 to get something done, that they can make that one phone call, whether it's 211 or wherever, and get the assistance that's needed, because it is much needed. And it's very heartbreaking as well as stressful and emotional to actually have to go through that. I just escrowed my rent in November, and the court ruled in my favor and reimbursed me my money, and my rent was zero. But it was only 3 weeks ago that the work was done in my house, and two years. That's ridiculous. Nobody should have to live like that. And I'm a disabled senior, and that didn't matter. So, and I called all the various agencies after agencies, and I think the politics on a local level, that needs to change, because the city of Akron has its own health department. Summit County has a health department. It needs to be everybody working together to make it better here in the city of Akron. When I first came here in 2000, I felt like I moved to Mayberry. I felt like any minute Barney or Ink B was going to come around the corner, because the people here had that southern hospitality. I felt like Akron was a city that cared about the people that lived here. But it seemed like when Mayor Pasquale retired, everything went out the window. The streets look horrible. They're very painful on people's body to travel around this city. But it's like the people in position, you need to work together to make the city better, to make housing better, to make people want to be here, because you're working for not just the landlords or the tenants, but you're working so that people can get something done now. When it comes to the tenants, this is really, really bad right now.
Thank you. So we hear a lot about conditions issues, as Ms. Holman has described here today. Mr. Lash, can you speak to what the city is doing? I've heard some things in the news in regards to inspectors and such things. Can you speak to what the city is doing in regards to housing conditions?
Yeah, how did I know you were going to call on me?
Sorry.
That's okay. Thank you, Ms. Holman. I know Ms. Holman very well. I'm glad you got that situation worked out. The city is actually we've actually increased our staffing levels, and we've increased our resources. So we actually have a plan to address a lot of these issues. In times past, in recent past rather, the reason why we haven't, because we had some lack of resources, but the mayor has approved additional resources because of some of these issues that have been occurring here within recent months. So a lot of these issues, as far as going out, being able to do inspections at these residences, those are going to be done, and they're going to be done at a faster and more rapid pace. And we're going to write orders to comply. We're going to, be a lot more stringent on some of these landlords, so to speak. One of the things I do want to say, to her point, a lot of residents don't understand how we're restricted as far as what we can do, because a lot of these homes they're subsidized by the federal government, HUD. So, we can't usurp the federal government. So there are restrictions, and I would just encourage you all to kind of learn the differences between the levels of government as far as what restrictions we do have. What we can do within our power, we will do. I can assure you of that. I know it maybe seems slow, but if you give us a call, if you press the issue, we will get out there and we will get it done.
I've seen more questions. I'm going to try and go the other side of the room here. Greg, I'm going to skip you though. Yes. I'm sorry, Craig, I love you. But back here, I'm gonna get to Greg in a minute.
Hi, my name is Lisa. I'm with United Way. My question, fair housing, you probably would be able to answer it best. And I ask this question because I pride myself in being a housing advocate, and I get those phone calls of, I am in a home that is month-to-month lease compared to being a yearly lease. And I feel that my landlord just terminated my lease because I brought up an issue. So now I feel like I'm being retaliated against. I wanted to see if you can, or if anybody on the panel could really speak to or provide guidance or advice on what we can say on the housing advocates and on when we're getting those phone calls.
Yeah. Does anybody want to take it, or you want me to?
I'll take that, because I'm going through that, ma'am. You hold your head up and you just deal with it. Life is about adversity. It's only gonna make you stronger. Sing out, speak to it. I mean, if we knew what we were capable of doing, we would amaze ourselves. I mean, yell, scream, or shout. It's the squeaky wheel that gets the oil. That's how I got it done. And I can sit with a telephone in front of me and I can dial 10 agencies and I'll be polite and courteous to them and thank them because they don't hear that. So when I call and I'm saying thank you for this, yes, I won them over on my side. It isn't hard, people. You just have to become involved and watch out for your neighbor. You know, we're here for each other.
I think from a policy perspective, what you've described really speaks to the imbalance that exists within our current structure of landlord-tenant law, where a landlord can make the choice. We're on a month-to-month lease. I'm going to give you a 30-day notice, and you do have to leave within that 30 days or potentially face eviction. And so that's where I think some of the imbalance comes in. So there's not a good answer for you because of that imbalance, and yes, that is something that could happen. But if tenants don't address the conditions issues that they're facing, then those landlords can't be held accountable. But it's really fearful to do that if you're going to lose your housing. The most important thing that any of us have is a safe, affordable, sustainable place to live. And when folks don't have that, or there's fear holding something over them to not be able to give that, that's really scary to do. Sometimes there's other ways to be able to address those concerns if they're fearful of telling the landlord. Sometimes they can just call the city and let them know that directly, and sometimes that can be done anonymously. Not always, but sometimes it can be. So there are some resources that exist, but unfortunately, that really speaks to that imbalance. Unfortunately.
And ma'am, if you have evidence, you know, that's something, even if, you know, over time, you know your landlord, you kind of know what they're capable of sometime. And I know that it's hard to prove retaliation. It's hard to prove that. But if you had any information, you know, just remember that part, you know, because don't nobody want to get turned into fair housing, or because their organization not ruthless, but there's other fair housing out there. And so it's other avenues to turn them in privately without any repercussions.
And I also want to add that I am a veteran, so I speak to these issues because I'm less likely to be attacked. So I have to mention that. But me being a veteran, I can be vocal and I can be heard, and that's all I want. I just want to be heard, because there's a lot of people who get stepped on and just forgotten about. We're not supposed to be seen. We're not supposed to be this. You're supposed to like it. Who likes living with roaches and bed bugs? I've seen people bitten all up, and they still won't take the photographs. I don't know.
And we've got a question over here.
Yes, thanks.
This gentleman's been.
I'm sorry.
Do you still have a question, sir? Okay. You'd been waiting.
Yeah, this question is for the gentleman from the city. I led a rent strike in New York City. We didn't have cooking gas for 2 years. Yeah, and I think the central problem was the landlord was a real estate trust. They were buying buildings for tens of millions of dollars. And our building, we probably, the rent strike, the cumulative amount was probably $200,000 to $300,000. It's nothing to them. And the fines from the city, as I understand it, was maybe like $4,000 a month. So they weren't motivated, even though they lost multiple times in court against us. So I'm not familiar with conditions in Akron, but I'm wondering what the city would do to address a situation like that.
To address a rent strike?
No, a situation where the landlord is corporate. It's a lot. They own thousands of properties.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, again, I'm not an attorney, but I can tell you how I can just give you some story that we've dealt with. We've dealt with some issues here in the city of Akron where a landlord had some blighted properties. The landlord was in London, England. So he had someone local that was dealing with the issues who had no decision-making capacity, who had no authority to make the decisions that were necessary in order to address the issues. So that's a big problem. I don't necessarily know how to address that, because when you have a landlord who actually has the decision-making capacity across another part of the world, what can you do? So we can only do what we can do based on our ordinances here in the city of Akron and try to work with the local individual to address those issues. But that's a big problem. I agree with you. And it's very frustrating from our standpoint as well, because when you have to deal with somebody, you have to, you're dealing with someone who's, it's 8 o'clock here and it's a different time, they may be in the bed, where can you find a resolution? So I understand your frustration, and we can only do the best we can, and we try as best we can to try to resolve it. It's a real problem.
All right, we're gonna go to Greg and then Mikia, and then we're gonna wrap it up for the day. So we've got 5 minutes, and we're gonna do those last 2 questions.
Okay, Greg Sane, Legal Aid. And some of these comments here bring up actually this landlord-tenant council report that's going to be issued. I don't know how specific it's going to get on some of the recommendations. Is there going to be a period of public, comment? For example, the example that this gentleman just spoke about, this would be a situation where it may be required, I would think, that somebody have decision-making capacity locally. And if they didn't have decision-making capacity, that would be addressed in some fashion. I'm not going to speak to what that would be, but the reality is that you do need somebody here that can make decisions now to address whatever that issue is. Or things like something where the landlord would be required to certify the condition of their property at the time of rental, that in fact it meets code, things like that, or even at the point of eviction, in a non-payment case, that it meets code, these kinds of things, where it would in essence be an attempt to address the responsibility issue that the lady in the back there mentioned earlier. I think it was Ms. Holman, just getting to some of these responsibility issues. So some of these properties, they're not financial vehicles, they're actually houses. And so they're treated as houses rather than an investment tool, if you will, a loan product, like a loan product of some sort, in other words, investment product. So that to me is part of where the mentality comes in, because some of these landlords, particularly with the LLCs were mentioned earlier, their whole business model is basically based on getting as much as they can out of a property, not doing anything, even to the point of tax foreclosure if that's what it takes, but they've made their money. And now with these high rents, they're taking money out of our community. Who knows where it's going and what they're doing with it. So I guess what I'm saying is there will be this report, I assume, that's issued at a certain point. I don't know how specific it's going to get. Is there going to be then the opportunity for follow-up in terms of public comment and further input? How is that process going to work?
It's a great question, great comments. There will be a report issued, and there will be an opportunity for the community to share their input. That has been, we are working toward that. It's going to be sometime later, probably this year, but we are working on that. Cheryl Stevens of EANDC is our chair. So we are working through that process now. We've had a number of speakers who have come to speak with us to share their ideas. Judge Cable and Montrella Jackson of Akron Muni Court have come. They were there yesterday. So we're gathering a lot. We're having a lot of conversations and getting a lot of ideas to contribute to this report that will be issued. And when that does happen, the community will have an opportunity to buy in and share their comments as well. So I can't tell you when that date's going to be, but I can assure you that that opportunity will be afforded.
And Mikio is our next question. We got like 1 minute.
Okay, where am I headed?
Right here. Where? Straight, right, turn right, right there. There you go.
Oh, I didn't know whose hand was up.
Hi, my name is Amika Mentor. I am an organizer at the Freedom Block. I am also the tenant president of the Erickson. My question is about inspections. Okay, I've been dealing with the housing division, and they go and they inspect these apartments. I was wondering, are they going to add codes and violations, because when they have been coming out, they've been looking for what's in plain sight. Rodents and droppings and everything is not going to be in plain sight. Rodents are not going to be in plain. Roaches are not either. So I feel like they should inspect a little more. And another question is, I just need advice. When you go to city council, when you go and talk to HUD, and you talk to HUD and they say, well, we got like 4 different departments and none of us communicate with each other, what do you do next to get your community help as far as uninhabitable housing?
Well, I can't speak for HUD. I can only speak for the city of Akron. That's a great question. And you're probably correct. And that's something, if you want to call my office, we can discuss having more in-depth inspections. We actually go by the ordinance of the city of Akron. So we do our inspections as far as what the criteria that is laid out by the city council. So we don't go outside of that, because we focus on what, our criteria, our set criteria. If there are additional issues that you think that we need to look at, give me a call and we can discuss that. Thank you.
So first and foremost, I want to thank our panelists for being with us today. Thank you all so much. I think I've heard 3 themes that we have brought up here today: conditions, education, and to correct the imbalance of power. So I hope as you go on here today and hear our speaker at lunch, Mr. Matthew Desmond, and also stay for the afternoon to have those conversations, let's talk about solutions to these issues that we've raised here today. Thank you all so much.
I'm going to remember you.